Without much ado, I would like to call upon the next speaker. It will be not an easy task because he is my mentor. Professor Husain Nagamia is, to me, without hesitation, the father of modern Islamic medicine. He has inspired many a generation all across the globe by being steadfast in discovering what has been our contribution, but not resting where he discovered. He himself visited the birthplace of Ibn Sina. Then when I met him in Tehran 11 years ago, he said, Dr. Qureshi, I really have to leave and go and visit the tomb in Hamadan of the great scholar of Islam. So he leads by example. He is a remarkable man, mashallah, and you're blessed to have him with us. And I thank Abdul Latif Aydin to have invited him and his team to have invited him. And I would like to invite him to give this inaugural address, Professor Husain Nagamia. Thank you very much, sir.
To that side of the lectern because that turns out better on the camera. Oh.
You have a pointer. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. It's indeed a great pleasure and honor to be here at Guy's Hospital in London and the King's College campus. It has very great memories for me because I spent 7 years in England in the 1960s, ending in 1970. Learning surgery in the UK. I was at various places. I was in Edinburgh's at Cambridge, Edinburgh's Hospital. I was at the Manchester Royal Infirmary, and I became a registrar and a senior registrar. And of course, I got my primary from FRCS from Glasgow, and then went to Edinburgh, Scotland, and got my FRCS from Edinburgh. And I came back, and my chief, Mr. Kenyon, his name was, said, Hussain, you should not be satisfied with a Scottish fellowship. You have to get the English fellowship to become a surgeon. So I accepted that challenge, and in the subsequent year, I took the FRCS from England, London. And so I did qualify as a surgeon in the UK, but then I was not satisfied. I wanted to become a heart specialist, a heart surgeon. And I was told at the time that the Mecca of heart surgery was Boston in the United States of America. So I decided that probably that should be the best place to go. So I inquired and found out that, you could. It was a very competitive place. There are big hospitals in Boston affiliated with the Harvard, and there are 3 medical schools in Boston, the Boston University, the Tufts Medical School, and the Harvard. So I was then encrypted into the 5th Harvard Surgical Service and had to take my surgical exam again in America to become the a board-certified surgeon in America before proceeding to become a cardiac surgeon. And then subsequently, I did do my cardiac surgery in Boston, and subsequently Boston proved to be too cold for me, so I moved to Florida, because Florida was just like my home. I come from Bombay in India, and Tampa, Florida is just like home. It's the same harbor, the same. So anyway, I settled in Tampa, and I've been there ever since 1976. And Tampa is a great place, and I invite you to come there because it will remiss you of all the tropical islands that you have been. And of course, the Disney World is very close. So with that introduction, now one interesting thing I want to tell you before I go further, I may have to cut my lecture a little bit because I've been told that instead of the 1 hour that I was allocated, it's going to be cut a little bit. So you may have to bear with me and, have a little less talk. Anyway, so as I said, I graduated from Bombay Medical School. I came to England. I studied for both the FRCSs, then went to Boston, did my American Board of Surgery. During all that time and all that study, I never ever know of a single Muslim that had contributed anything towards surgery. And I was very, very upset. I said, oh my God, such a big Islamic civilization, and they have not contributed anything to surgery? And I was very disappointed, and I was disheartened. And then, luckily for me, in 1973, two English doctors, Dr. Lewis and Dr. Spink, published a book here. The title was Al-Buqasis, and I'm going to show you a little bit of the book, the cover of the book in my presentation. This Al-Buqas is a friend of mine who I had talked to in England and told him that Muslims never contributed anything to medicine, leave alone surgery, They said, look, you're wrong. Here's a book that gives you a complete translation of a book published by a very famous Islamic surgeon. Although his Latin name is Al-Buqasis, his real name is Al-Zahrawi. And they sent me that book. I was so fascinated with the book, I read it from cover to cover within like about 4 or 5 days. And I was fascinated because many operations that were described in the book were exactly as we do it today. If you say the varicose veins, lithotripsy, so many other operations that they are described in the book is exactly as they are done today. So I was amazed. I said, why is this Al-Buqasis al-Zahrawi not even mentioned anywhere in the literature of books that we read? But that is our own fault. Our fault is because Muslim historians, Muslim scientists have not written books in which they mention the achievements of the Muslim civilization. So from then on, I became very stimulated, and I embarked on a journey of trying to learn as to what were the contributions of the Muslims towards the modern medicine. And this is the presentation I'm going to give you. How do I advance the slides? Sorry. You have to teach me about this. Oh, the keyboard. Good. That's simple. I can operate that. So I have worked at a very, very busy hospital. It's a 1,000-bedded hospital. I don't know how many beds is Guy's Hospital. How many beds is Guy's Hospital? Less than 1,000. So it's almost comparable to 1,000. And, I became the chief of cardiac surgery, served there for 10 years, and now I'm in private practice. I also was the past president of the Islamic Medical Association of North America, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about that, and also about the International Institute of Islamic Medicine, and I was past editor of the JIMA, Journal of Islamic Medical Association of America, that is published quarterly, and it is now a digital journal, and all of you can go and just say JIMA and .org, and you will be taken to the journal. And lots of articles of mine are published in that, and you will be. So the Islamic Medical Association is the association that has the largest number of physicians in the United States. We have about 2,000 and more physicians that are members. And we have, the interesting thing is we have 1,000 and more Muslim medical students as members. And this is very encouraging to us, which means that, you know, the Muslim population, physician population in the United States is growing. Now, we have about 10 to 11,000 Muslim physicians in the United States, but only 2,000, as I said, are permanent members of the Islamic Medical Association. That's our emblem. In 1992, the Islamic Medical Association, at my behest, I read a paper to the Islamic Medical Association annual convention in Spain, and I brought to their attention that, you know, we need to do research in the history of Islamic medicine. This paper was very critically analyzed by the committee, and ultimately they sanctioned the formation of an institute to further the research of history of Islamic medicine. Not Islamic medicine itself, but just the history of Islamic medicine. And that was formulated in 1992 and is now in existence. Well, here's a little thing from our president that I bring to you. Barack Obama is very friendly with all the Muslims. This is when he was campaigning in his second term. He came to Tampa, and being a sort of an honorable citizen of Tampa, I was invited to be one of the hosts, and it was a very pleasure to meet with him and talk to him. And I told him, President, there's something common between you and me. He said, what? What is common? I said, my first name is Husain, and your middle name is Husain. So he laughed, and he kind of shook my hand, and he tapped me on my back, and just grinned, and didn't say anything much, because as you know, it's a little touchy point in America. Now, you all are familiar with the modern cardiac operating room. It's a very complicated kind of setup. There's a lot of equipment, as you see here. There's the surgeon myself right here, and then there is the assistant surgeon. Then there is the nurse who scrubs in, the anesthesiologist, and there are actually several more people in the room. And here are the set of instruments. Tremendous number of sets of instruments. The cardiac pump, you have to have a bypass. If you don't have a bypass, you can't perform cardiac surgery. So this complicated set of instruments, we think that, you know, oh my God, these were all built up by you know, contributions from the Western civilization. Not true, not true, as I'm going to show. Now, very quickly going, the periods of medicine can be divided into the ancient or the Greek, Roman, the Islamic period, the pre-modern or European period, and the modern, or now the American medicine is supposed to be considered the topmost in the world. So the history of medicine can also be divided into the pre-rational period. Prior to the actual advent of logical medicine, the medicine was considered as something the body was possessed by evil spirits. So who were the people that were treating the sick people? It was the priest. You took the person to the priest in the temple or in the holy place, you know, in Egypt as well. They would you know, sacrifice some animals, do some incantations, burn some incense, and hope that the patient got better. And many times, as you know, most of the diseases cure themselves. So therefore, the patient felt better, and then the cure was attributed to the priest, and they gave him more money and more sacrifices, you know. So, but with the advent of Hippocrates, the rational medicine entered. Why was Hippocrates considered the father of medicine? Because Hippocrates was the first one that categorically stated that disease is because of a derangement in the body environment. That is how he defined disease. And that if you want to get the disease better, you have to get the body back to normal again. if you do get the body back to normal again, then the disease will be cured. And this rationality that he applied to medicine was the first time ever expressed by Hippocrates. Then his student Galen was another one who did a lot of teaching all over the world, and he migrated to Rome, became a physician to the Romans, and he cured many diseases and wrote a compendium, Galen. In fact, I was in Turkey, and I went to Izmir, and there is Asclepia. Asclepia was the hospital in ancient times, about 300 BC. And Asclepius was named so because the god of medicine was considered Asclepius, and therefore it was called Asclepia. Anyway, the story is very, very interesting, but I don't have the time to go through that, maybe some another time. But that's when the rational period started. And then, of course, the Muslims took over the medicine, and they refined it, and they described it. And so Hippocrates was there, and Galen, which I told you, I'm not going to dwell on it too long. As I said, I have to proceed a little faster. But here is what, how the medicine was actually came to the Muslims. The school that was established just in the pre-Islamic era was the school in Jundishapur. From Jundishapur, scholars came from India, from China, from the, of course, a lot of it was from the Greek, the Hellenistic world, and some even came from Byzantium. Then it was transferred to, from Jundishapur, it went to Baghdad, where a center of great medical learning was established. And from there, it traveled to Cairo, Cordoba, Toledo, to Western Europe. And in the Western Europe, that's where Renaissance took place. So you know there is a direct connection between the transfer of knowledge between the East and the West. And who is it through? It's through the Muslim civilization. So it's important for us to know that. So we are going to concentrate only on the Islamic period in this particular presentation. During this period, the Europe was in dark ages, as has already been told by my predecessor. One interesting thing, Professor Gumti, was that a river has been named in India after you. You didn't know that. Did you know that? You know that, good. So he's obviously a very well-known personality because even an Indian river has been named after him. So Islamic civilization was flourishing and reached the zenith of development. Medicine as practiced in the Islamic land was the only rational medicine that was practiced. In Europe, it was totally voodoo medicine. It was burning of, people were burned sometimes, people were flagged, people were, they had burns on their bodies and everything to get the evil out of their spirits. So if the Europeans wanted to learn medicine just like I traveled to learn about heart surgery to Boston, which is the Mecca of heart surgery at the time when I, I finished my surgical career. So the Europeans used to travel to the Islamic lands to learn about medicine. And there are a lot of documented evidence about this. I'm not bringing this up as just a tale. So in the periods of Islamic medicine, there was the period of the Islamic Renaissance, when the knowledge was accumulated, the knowledge was gathered together, it was documented, and then the Muslims started adding their own experimentation, as was said already. They added a lot of it by their own experimentation, and subsequently they wrote encyclopedias of medicine for the first time in the history of medicine, except the one written by Hippocrates and Galen. Those were the only two ancient physicians that wrote encyclopedias of medicine. But the Muslims were the next one to follow, and they systematized. In fact, the professor of medical history at Oxford Professor Emil Savard has said repeatedly that it was the Muslims who have perfected the art of documentation of medicine, of collection of medicine, and experimentation, observation, and ultimately application. So they did a lot, and they should really deserve. And this is what it is today. We learn, as has been pointed out, and as was already shown before, that experimentation, implementation, and application were all invented during the Islamic era, and then ultimately it was transmitted during the occupation of the Muslims in Spain. It was transmitted to the Arabic treaties were all translated into Latin, and then they were dispersed to Europe. And that's when the European Renaissance in medicine began, at 1258 to 1500 Christian era. So the early Islamic era was concentrated by the school of Jindishapur. I visited the site. It is not anything to see there now. There's a school of pharmacy there now instead of a school of medicine. But Nestorian Christians were the first to establish the school. They were the migrants from the persecution of the Byzantine emperor. They came and they settled in Jindishapur, and they were encouraged to do so by the King Shapur, who was a Persian king at the time. And then Naushirwan and Adil, who was a subsequent Persian king, he encouraged this. He brought emissaries from physicians from India, he brought physicians from China, and he perfected the Jindishapur school. Now, after the advent of Islam in 622, the town of Jindishapur was overrun by one of the generals of Hazrat Umar. When it was overrun, the school and the hospital were running very efficiently by the Nestorian Christians. And what did the Muslims do? The Muslims said, you continue treating the patients, you continue writing and experimenting and all that, but now it will be under the support and under the banner of the Muslims. And that's what happened. They were patronized by the Muslims, and in fact, the first Christian physicians of the Islamic Empire were all Christians. The Bukhtishu family, very well known, I wrote a complete article of that in the Jima, you can go and see it. They were physicians for 300 years, the Bukhtishu family. The Masawayh family was there too. And lots of other Christians were there. So the early people that actually came into the Islamic lands were the Christians, because they were the ones that were already had acquired the rationality of medicine and had taught the rationality of medicine. And the Muslims came to know, they were, as has been told, they had acquired the scientific know-how. They had started learning about the basic sciences. And they said, continue all this good work that you're doing. In fact, when the Caliph, the Abbasid Caliph, Mansur, fell sick, and all his physicians could not cure him, they invited Bukhtishu to come from Jindishapur to come and treat him. He came and treated to Baghdad, he cured him, and he was invited to stay in Baghdad and to start a hospital. But he refused. He wanted to go back to Jindishapur. But it was his grandson who came to Jindishapur back and started the first hospital in Baghdad. So medical teachings in Jindishapur, as I said, were based on rational thinking. They were not based on superstition. And therefore, they were very scientific in that sense. Because of the various translations of the Greek literature into Arabic, House of Wisdom was formed by the Khalifa al-Ma'mun, who was an Abbasid Caliph. between 214 after Hijra or the 830 of the Christian era. The Caliph obtained his knowledge books from every direction, and didn't matter what he had to do to get the knowledge. He paid the translation worth in gold. Whenever they defeated an enemy like the Byzantine emperor, they defeated him in the war, the ransom was, please give us all the books that you have in your library, all the Greek books. The Greek books were collecting dust in their libraries. So they were brought to Baghdad, and then they were made translation, and the translation was paid in gold. So this kind of knowledge became very quickly absorbed by the Arabs and became the beneficial points in the development of Arabic or Islamic medicine. Here is a picture. I think you saw that in the exhibition. So it's a teacher and the school, and as you saw that not only there were males, but there were females as well that were, there were observatories built where, in fact, I was just there in Uzbekistan, and one of their big rulers was a great astronomer. He wrote books on astronomy, and his books were translated into Latin, and they formed the basis of the astronomical atlases that have been used by all the space agencies. In fact, his name, there was a crater in the moon by the NASA, by the Aeronautical Society of America, named after him, a crater of the moon, in the honor that he was the first one to publish real atlases of astronomical charts. And you can see his laboratory even now when you go to Bukhara. And I would recommend all of you to visit Uzbekistan. And the researches that were done were phenomenal. As has been pointed out, that Ibn Khaldun, he said that the Khalifa ordered researches to be done in every science possible, and their results of the researches were noted. Here is a very famous book by the herbalist Dioscorides. He studied a lot of plants, and these were translated into Arabic, and again, their weight was paid in gold. The Jundishapur school was then transferred to Baghdad, and Bukhtishu, the grandson of the senior Bukhtishu, became the chief medical officer, and this was during the time of Harun al-Rashid. As the hospitals were built, these were the first hospitals ever to be built in the history of the world and the civilization. So that's a big contribution that the Islamic civilization made, that they, instead of previously what used to happen is that the patient was taken to the temple, and and I'll show you a picture of that, or the doctor visited, the priest or whoever visited the patient in the home. The idea that all the patients can be gathered at one place so that the doctors could see them all at one place is a very Islamic idea. And it was instituted, at least it was put into practice during the period of Islamic civilization. So a very great contribution indeed. So here's a Greek temple, and the child is sick, and he's been brought to the Greek temple, and then the priest will, start with incense and incantation and sacrifices. And you can see it in the Asclepius when you go to Izmir and see the Asclepius down there. It's very, very interesting. The first Islamic hospital that was built was in the reign of Khalifa Harun al-Rashid in 170 to 193 after Hijra, or 786 to 809 Christian era. Having heard of the famous medical institution at Jundishapur already described, the Khalifa invited the son of the chief physician, Bukhtishu II, to come to Baghdad and head the new Bimaristan. And he was given ample amounts of money to implement his hospital. Then there was even a bigger hospital built, Adudi Hospital. It is said that Rabbi al-Razi was the first physician to be appointed the chief of the Adudi Hospital. It's very interesting how he picked the site of the hospital. The Khalifa called him and he says he was practicing in near Tehran, what modern Tehran is. So he was called by the order of the Khalifa. He was invited to come to Baghdad. He was given ample amount of money and says, build me one of the best hospitals. So what he did was he cut meat into several pieces and he had it hung into various parts of the city, and then had inspectors go and inspect the meat, and then the place where the meat had putrefied the least was the site that he selected, which means that he knew that there were bacteria or some microbes that were in the atmosphere that were creating the putrefaction of the meat, and that it is best not to build a hospital in a place where the putrefaction appeared rapidly because the environment was contaminated. So this was the first indication for a person before the advent of microscope or any other means of knowing that he had inferred in his mind that this is how infection occurs. This hospital was visited by a traveler in 580, and he recorded this hospital was like a great castle. It had continuous water supply, and it had the appearances of royal palaces. These are documented, documentaries of these. And these were the Bimaristans or the Maristans, as they were called. They multiplied very rapidly after the first hospital was built because the fame grew to distant lands and people started coming to the hospitals to get treated. They were also run very, very efficiently. Here's the Al-Nuri Hospital that was in Damascus. I visited Damascus about 10 years ago, much before the Syrian Revolution, and visited the Nuri Hospital, which is now a museum. And this is the picture that I took. And here is the courtyard of the Nuri Hospital. And the courtyard shows you that they knew that air and ambience and fresh air was very necessary for the recovery of a patient. So they had all these very airy courtyards built so that they could, the patients could go relax, get fresh air, and get healthy as soon as possible. I won't go into the details of the history of Al-Nuri Hospital for want of time. But you can visit our site, which is www, if you want to write it down, International Institute of Islamic Medicine, which is IIIM.org. So www.IIIM.org. And you'll find many of these things already published, and you'll find a lot of slides, you'll find a lot of pictures, so you can take advantage of the presentation that is there only. Now let me tell you a little bit about the Mansouri Hospital. The Mansouri Hospital was built in Cairo. It was built in 1248. It was built by the order of the governor of Egypt, Mansur Qalun, and it had 8,000 beds. Now tell me a single hospital today that has 8,000 beds. None. And this hospital beds were divided into female, male, infectious disease, non-infectious disease, orthopedics, ophthalmology, and you name it. It had physicians, resident physicians in-house. It had consulting physicians that came from the outside. The ruler himself came almost weekly to grant a sum of money so that the hospitals could be run completely free. Completely free. It was, and I'll show you why it was free. You should read the Waqf document, which is now available. The document, a trust document. This was another thing. Because of the compulsory zakat in Islam, it was necessary for this very, very rich people to dispose of their money somehow. So how did they do it? They established trusts. And these trusts, which for the first time came into existence, were then benefiting all the patients and all the people that came to these hospitals. And they say that the annual income from endowments alone was 1 million dirhams. You know, that's almost equivalent to $1 trillion in today's money. More than $1 trillion. At that time, this was, I mean, I'm talking about 1248 of the Christian era. Now let me read you, very interestingly, what was the Waqf document. I think, well, here's the complex, the Mansur al-Qawloon. It's in Egypt. The hospital is in ruins now. It doesn't exist. And there is another Maristan in Cairo, which is seen here, which is also kind of only the ruins. This is when I visited Cairo. Now here's the Waqf document of Mansouri Hospital. This is written in archaic English, so I'm going to just read to you in simple English. The Waqf document specifically stated, the hospital shall keep all patients, men and women, until they are completely recovered. Do we do that now? No. All costs are to be borne by the hospital, whether the people come from afar or near, whether they are resident or foreigners, strong or weak, low or high, rich or poor, employed or unemployed, blind or sighted, physically or mentally ill, learned or illiterate. Every category of patient has to be treated. There are no condition of consideration of payment. Can you go to any hospital today where they don't ask you about payment? I doubt it very much. At least in America it doesn't exist. Maybe in England it exists. Does it? Or does it not? Dr. Abdul Latif, what do you think? You still have to pay some money, don't you? No, it's free. So that's good at least. Very good. Not in America. Forget it. You have to pay for everything. The entire service is through the magnificence of Allah, the generous one. So it was provided as a pure charity. That was it. And I mean, this document exists, and you can go and see it. It is now something was already told to you about Al-Qarwan Hospital and the university that the lady built, and how it thrived. It was one of the first universities in the Islamic Empire, and it set the tone for the universities. 400 years later, the Europeans started learning from the Islamic example. They started copying it in Europe. And in 14th and 15th centuries, the first Bimaristans or the hospitals were built. Until then, there were no hospitals, no hospitals. The Muslims were the first to really coin the term for pharmacy. The first to gather the medicines, to compound the medicines, to dispense the medicines. They were created in the Islamic lands for the first time. They didn't exist before that. The doctors used to compound their own medicines, give it. But the establishment of a pharmacist was in the time of the Islamic period. Again, about 4 or 5 centuries later, the Europeans copied the advent of the pharmacy. And then they built similar pharmacies in Italy, Rome, Salerno, and Padua, and all these places. So I think that's my first part of the contribution. There is another one. Do you want me to go on, or shall we stop? Do I have any more time left? Another 10 minutes, okay. So we'll have to rush and see what we can do. All right, so, yes, okay, fine. Now, I mean, I must tell you that, we hear of only very few Islamic physicians, but when you go to research out the Islamic physicians, there were hundreds of them. And you have so many of these books available. Now, if you go to the proper libraries, but you have to do the research. I mean, I have traveled extensively. I've visited libraries in India, in Pakistan, in China, in Malaysia, in Europe, most of the libraries in Europe, of course in England, and of course in America, the Bethesda, National Library in America. So, I mean, you have to really dig out this information to be able to fathom it. Look at the names. I mean, I'm not going to even read them. They are all there in the website, and you can look at them. By century, every century had 15 to 20 physicians who were very, very well known and who contributed positively to the development of medicine. Even as late as the 14th to 15th century, there were physicians that still contributed to the development of medical sciences. But the great Islamic physicians were few, and they are well known, and as I told you before, the first physicians in the Islamic, because Islam was a new religion, so they did not have scientific people immediately following. The Bukhtishus and the Masawyhs, who were Nestorian Christians, were the first physicians that came into the Islamic lands. They started in Janishapur, then they were invited to Baghdad. But then the Muslim physicians took over. Among the Muslim physicians were Al-Razi, Al-Majusi, and Tabbari. Now, Dr. Gumti, Al-Majusi was not, he started off as a Zoroastrian, but he converted to Islam. On invitation of the Khalifa, he ultimately converted to Islam. So he was also a Muslim, and so was Tabbari. In the era of the epoch of Islamic medicine, Ibn Sima, Al-Zahrawi were at the top, and during the decline, one of the very famous physicians was Ibn Nafis, who was the discoverer of the pulmonary and the coronary circulation. And of course, for each of these, I can give you a lecture worth almost an hour. So the subject is so expansive that it is impossible to, completely, squeeze it into a 45-minute presentation. Here's the family of Bukhtishu. They produced physicians for 3 centuries, father, son, and so forth. Their entire history is given in my article on the Bukhtishus, which I wrote in the Journal of Islamic Medical Association, has been published, and it is also there on the website. So if you're interested to learn about Bukhtishus, go to the website and you will learn. Here's an illustration. I think you saw that in the, I don't know if this was there in the exhibition, but it is there in one of the books. I will just bypass the Bukhtishu family. They were very astute physicians. They cured many a disease. They treated the caliph, and they got paid very well with it. And I'll pass that as well. They contributed a lot to the development of the Islamic medicine, and therefore they are featured in my presentation. They also did other contributions like zoology. They were illustrating, animals and so forth in their books. Then the Masawayh family was another family that did a lot of contributions. One of the important things is that, they said that Muslim physicians or physicians during the Islamic era did not do dissection because dissection was prohibited. Well, what they dissected was they dissected apes. Apes were actually bought by the order of the Khalifa. They were bought from Africa to Baghdad, Iraq, and then they They were dissected by the Bukhtishus because the Muslims were kind of hesitant in dissecting anything. So they were dissected, and that anatomy was then actually studied. Another brilliant Christian physician was Husain ibn Ishaq. He was not only a physician, but he was a translator par excellence. He knew 3 languages. He mastered Greek, he mastered Syriac, and he mastered Arabic. And to him, he was so clever that, very difficult terminology like flexor brevis or flexor longus or whatever the name of the, how can you translate that into Arabic? Now he coined words, root words from the Arabic language and described all these. As a result, the Arabic language became the standard medical nomenclature of the time. If you wanted to learn medicine, you had to learn Arabic, because it's just like now, if you want to learn medicine, you have to learn English. I mean, I'm sure there are some terms in Russian, or there are some terms in Chinese and Japanese, but most of the literature today is in English, so you have to learn the English terminology. I mean, being in another language, you are always at a disadvantage. So that's what Husain ibn Ishaq did. He was also an ophthalmologist. He wrote 2 treatises on ophthalmology, and then Tabari was the first one that wrote, as he said, that they were Zoroastrian or Jewish origin, but they converted to Islam, and then they wrote several books. One of the most famous physicians, of course, is Al-Razi. His full name was Muhammad ibn Zakaria Al-Razi. He was born in 251 after Hijra. He was born near a town near Tehran, which I visited. Unfortunately, not much remains of it's called Ray. And it's very close to Tehran. You can go in the suburb of Tehran and you can actually see it. His fame starts by, he started practice in Ray, became very quickly famous as a physician. Then he was invited by the Khalifa, as I told you, to Baghdad. And here is his portrait. And he started practice in Baghdad, became very famous. I told you how he selected the hospital. Not only that, but he was the first one that organized the teaching of medicine like it is today. One of his students, Ibn Abi Usaybiyah, wrote the history of physicians. And that's a very important source for us. In fact, I have it right now, which we are trying to translate it into English. Ibn Abi Usaybiyah. This history was written in the 1200s. And it tells you of every physician, what they wrote, how many books they wrote, how many Al-Razi wrote, how many Ibn Sina wrote, and it's a wealth of information. Now, he was the one that said how your teaching was done. Well, Ibn Razi was the chief. Under him, there were fellows. In the 3rd tier, there were residents. And then there were the interns. This is how he organized. So the patients were first seen, in fact, the patients were first seen by medical students. They came and the medical students took the history and everything. Then they presented it to the interns. Then the interns in turn presented to the residents. And the residents presented it to the fellows. And the fellows presented, only the difficult cases were seen by Al-Razi himself. And there are many records of what cases he saw and described in his book Al-Hawi. And one of the most important contributions that he made was he distinguished between smallpox, measles, and chickenpox. And therefore, he already had a lot of ideas about infection. He was the first one to distinguish these 3 diseases individually, which was confused before. He published a monograph that was translated into every European language. And for 300 years, they followed it to the letter. They followed it to the letter. That's the contribution that he made, because he defined how to differentiate between these by the clinical presentation, by the types of skin rashes that occurred, and by all the other clinical symptomology. He described pyelonephritis. He described allergy to the roses. He was the first one to actually And I was questioning, there was a presentation outside which says catgut was used by Al-Zahrawi. Al-Razi was the first one that used the catgut. And then Al-Zahrawi improved on it. He improved on it later on. So, very important. But those are stories which you have to, really learn and present and so forth. I think we are about to finish. So, I couldn't tell you about the story about Ibn Sina, but Ibn Sina was the giant of Islamic medicine. He wrote the Qanun fil Tibb. He was such a scholar that he wrote everything he knew about medicine at the age of 22. And when he was writing the Qanun fil Tibb, he never referred to anything. He just sat, asked the scribe, take a dictation, and the scribe wrote. And this is written by the scribe himself, the biography, which we have. We completely have his biography. So he did leave a biography behind, which again, I have a copy of it, and it is being published also on the website. I think I'll stop there. You saw the pictures of Ibn Sina up there. I described some more. There are some other physicians as well. Al-Zahrawi, the surgeon. As I said, each of these will take at least an hour to describe. So if we don't have that kind of time, maybe next time, inshallah. And thank you very much. You have been a very good audience.
We have chance to Q&A you.
Sure, sure.
Thank you. It's an honor to share the dais with this illustrious professor of surgery who, to my all known knowledge, is perhaps the pioneer of this discipline in our times. Over the last 40 years, he's contributed massively. And Dr. Nagamia, you mentioned you hailed from India, studied in Britain. All I can say is you're on loan to America. We wish you come back to Britain and establish an institute of Islamic medicine here, inshallah, one day. And I'm sure Guy's Hospital will take a lead on that. Thank you very much. I'm sure you'll have a chance to question the professor and ask him questions in the interactive session.